Welcome to Simplified UPSC by PPP, where we listen, learn, and grow together. Detailed lecture notes in English and Hindi, plus practice questions for prelims and mains, only on our Telegram channel. Link in description. Like and subscribe for more.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling terrestrial ecosystems. Our mission, as always, is to take this dense, often complex research material and turn it into something you can really grasp quickly and logically.
That's right. We're diving into the world's major biomes and then really drilling down into the specific Indian forest types. You know, the kind of detail needed for serious exam preparation.
Exactly. This is for the learner needing structure, speed, and importantly, precision.
And precision is absolutely the word here. When we talk terrestrial ecology, essentially how life works on land, the organisms and their environment, it all boils down to two main drivers.
Let me guess. Water and warmth.
You got it. Moisture and temperature. Pretty much everything we'll discuss today, why certain plants grow where they do, why animals have specific adaptations. It comes back to how moisture and temperature interact across the globe.
So the world's biomes are almost like a giant gradient map then, changing as you move north or south or up a mountain.
Precisely. As you shift in latitude, moving away from the poles towards the equator, or as you change altitude, climbing higher, those two factors, moisture and temperature, shift, and life just responds dramatically.
The core differences then stem from climate variations driven by altitude and latitude.
Exactly. So that's our plan today. We're going to move systematically. We'll start at the really cold extremes, the poles, and work our way through explaining the what and the why for each major zone.
Okay, let's start that journey. Section 1. The cold frontiers, Tundra and Taiga. Sounds chilly. Right, our starting point. The tundra biome. We're talking the absolute northernmost and southernmost land areas, basically hugging the ice caps. For anyone learning about this, the word that probably comes to mind is harsh. What makes it so incredibly hostile? What's the biggest limiting factor?
Well, the defining thing, the real restriction, it's a combination. You've got the extreme cold, obviously, but crucially, you also have permafrost.
Permafrost, that's permanently frozen ground, right?
Exactly. Soil that stays frozen solid year-round, and because it's frozen, water can't drain through it effectively. So even though overall precipitation is low, the soil surface above the permafrost becomes waterlogged during the very short summer thaw.
Ah, okay, so low rain, but soggy ground.
Yep. Add in that incredibly short growing season, and you get conditions where trees just can't survive. Their roots can't penetrate the frozen layer deep down, so it's mostly treeless, apart from maybe some, stunted little shrubs in the slightly less harsh southern edges.
Which makes any life there seem pretty remarkable. The plants, the flora, must be incredibly specialized. What kind of things manage to grow?
They are highly specialized. You find things like lichen, mosses, sedges, cotton grass, also some hardy low-growing shrubs like dwarf heath, willows, and birches.
How do they even cope with such a short, stressful season?
They have some fascinating tricks. Because the window for growth is maybe just a few weeks long, they have to maximize it. But many also adopt a strategy of, extreme patience.
Patience? How so?
Take the Arctic willow, for instance. It grows incredibly slowly, but it makes up for it with a really long lifespan, sometimes 150, maybe even 300 years. And structurally, they have defenses. Things like a thick cuticle, like a waxy outer layer, and dense epidermal hair to protect against the cold and drying winds.
Amazing. Slow and steady wins the race. Tundra style. And what about the animals, the big names we associate with the Arctic?
Yeah, the fauna is iconic. You've got reindeer or caribou, musk ox, Arctic fox, polar bear, snowy owl, lemmings, Arctic hare, ptarmigan. Those are the key players.
One thing that jumps out from the source material is what's missing. It notes a near total absence of reptiles and amphibians.
And that tells you a lot, doesn't it? It speaks volumes about the challenge of maintaining body temperature in such an extreme environment. Cold-blooded animals just can't make it work there.
So the mammals that do thrive must have serious adaptations for warmth.
Absolutely classic heat conservation strategies. They generally follow Allen's rule and Bergman's rule, basically. Large body size relative to their surface area helps retain heat. And crucially, they have small extremities. Think small tails, small ears. It minimizes the surface area where heat can escape, keeping that core temperature up. Big bodies, small bits sticking out.
Okay, before we leave the tundra concept, we need to touch on the fact that you don't just find tundra near the poles.
Yeah.
Altitude can create similar conditions, right? Like in the Himalayas.
Yes, this is really important, especially for understanding Indian geography. You have alpine tundra, and specifically the source mentions moist alpine scrub. This is found high up along the Himalayas and also near the border with Myanmar.
How does it compare to the Arctic tundra?
Well, it shares the treeless nature, but the conditions are a bit different. It's characterized by low, scrubby vegetation, sometimes small patches of dense evergreen forest, things like rhododendron and birch. But a key difference is moisture. Unlike the often dry Arctic tundra, this alpine scrub gets heavy snowfall, and you find more mosses and ferns. It's a wetter, sort of vertical version of that cold, treeless biome.
Got it. Altitude mimicking latitude, a
Right.
crucial concept. Okay, let's move slightly south now, conceptually speaking, into the next major zone, the taiga, also known as the boreal forest. This must mean a shift in the climate budget.
A significant shift. We're moving from a zone defined by that permanent frost, the permafrost, to one defined by really strong seasonality. The taiga means cold regions, yes, but with higher rainfall overall compared to tundra and very distinct seasons. Really long, harsh winters, but also defined short, cool summers. This is the kingdom of the conifer.
The classic Christmas trees, like spruce, fir, and pine trees. Their shape seems perfectly designed for snow.
It really is a brilliant adaptation. That conical shape helps shed heavy snow, preventing branches from breaking, and those narrow, needle-like leaves. They're great at minimizing water loss, which is vital during winter when the ground is frozen and roots can't easily pull up water.
Makes sense.
But there's a consequence to all those needles. When they fall and decompose, they make the soil highly acidic. This slow decomposition means the forest floor isn't very nutrient-rich, which makes it harder for other types of trees, like broad-leaved deciduous ones, to compete.
So, still a tough environment, but maybe slightly less extreme than the tundra. Enough to support a bit more variety in animal life.
Yes, definitely. The fauna still reflects the cold climate. You get many fur-bearing animals like the lynx, wolf, bear, red fox, porcupine, squirrel. But what's really notable is that some cold-tolerant amphibians reappear here. The source mentions hyla tree frogs and rana true frog species.
Oh, interesting. Why them?
It suggests that while the winters are brutal, those short summers are just warm and long enough for these amphibians to complete their life cycles, something they just couldn't manage up in the tundra.
Okay, so we've used that temperature gradient to move from the icy tundra to the coniferous taiga. Now let's continue our journey south into warmer territory.
Right. As we move further south from the poles or down from high altitudes, both average temperature and the amount of available moisture generally increase quite a bit, and this changes the whole structure of the forest. We start seeing more broadleaf trees and much greater biodiversity.
So we're entering the realm of temperate and subtropical forests. These feel like a bridge between the cold taiga and the really hot, wet equatorial zones. Let's look first at temperate rainforests. The source material had a really interesting detail about where they get their water. It wasn't quite what I expected.
Yes, that's a fascinating point. These forests definitely have marked seasons, clear temperature shifts and rainfall patterns, and rainfall is high. But the text highlights that heavy fog is often an even more important source of water than the rain itself.
Wait, fog? More important than rain? How does that work? How can fog deliver more water?
Well, it's about how the water is captured and retained. Fog consists of tiny water droplets suspended in the air. When this fog rolls through the forest canopy, the droplets collect directly on the surfaces of leaves and needles. This is called fog drip.
Ah, okay.
This condensed water then drips down to the forest floor and the root zone. The key thing is, this process avoids a lot of the evaporative loss you might get with rainfall, especially lighter rain, before it even hits the ground. In areas with persistent fog, like coastal regions, it becomes this very steady, reliable source of moisture, particularly during periods that might otherwise be drier. It helps keep the ecosystem consistently damp.
That makes sense. That constant dampness would explain why they have pretty high biodiversity, right?
Yeah.
Though the source says still much lower than tropical rainforests.
Exactly. High for a temperate zone, but not quite the explosion of life you see nearer the equator. Now, moving along that gradient, we get to the subtropical rainforests. These are also called broad-leaved evergreen forests.
Okay, what defines them? Still high rainfall.
Yes, fairly high rainfall, but the key climatic difference here is temperature stability. There's less temperature difference between winter and summer compared to the true temperate zones. You don't get those really harsh winter colds or strong seasonal temperature swings.
And that stability shows in the way the forest looks.
It does. That combination of stable temperatures and high humidity creates the perfect conditions for epiphytes.
Epiphytes. Those are plants that grow in other plants, right?
Hmm.
Like air plants, some orchids, mosses.
Precisely. They grow harmlessly on the branches and trunks of trees, drawing moisture and nutrients from the air and rain. They are incredibly common in subtropical rainforests. And the animal life. The source says it's very similar to what you find in tropical rainforests, which really signals that we're getting close to those high biodiversity equatorial conditions.
Which brings us neatly to the ecological superstars, the tropical rainforests. Everyone knows they're hotspots for biodiversity, but the source highlights a really key structural feature we need to grasp: stratification. What exactly is that?
Stratification is probably the most distinctive structural feature of a tropical rainforest. It means the vegetation is arranged in very clear, distinct horizontal layers. Think of it like floors in a building.
Okay, layers. How many?
Typically, 3 main layers are distinguished. At the very top, you have the emergent layer. These are giant trees, maybe poking up well above the main roof of the forest, exposed to strong sunlight, wind, and temperature changes.
Right above everything else.
Then below that, you have the main canopy layer. This is like a dense, continuous ceiling formed by the crowns of most of the large trees. It's where the vast majority of sunlight is intercepted, where most photosynthesis happens, and where a huge amount of animal life is concentrated: monkeys, birds, insects.
The busy layer. And below that?
Below the canopy is the understory, sometimes called the shrub layer. Down here, it's much darker, very humid, and relatively still. Plants here have to be adapted to low-light conditions, shade-tolerant shrubs, young trees waiting for a gap in the canopy, herbs on the forest floor.
Wow, so the environment changes dramatically just moving vertically within the same forest.
Hugely. The amount of light reaching the forest floor can be tiny, maybe less than 2% of the light hitting the top emergent trees. This vertical structuring forces plants and animals to specialize in living at different heights, which is a big reason why you get such immense species richness packed into one area. Everyone finds their niche, vertically.
It sounds incredibly complex and rich. Yet, we often hear that tropical rainforests are surprisingly fragile, especially when humans get involved. Why would such a diverse system be so vulnerable?
The vulnerability.
Yeah.
It lies primarily in the soil and the nutrient cycle. You see, in a tropical rainforest, the ecosystem is incredibly efficient at recycling nutrients. Because it's always warm and wet, decomposition of dead leaves, branches, animals, it happens almost instantly on the forest floor.
Okay, so nutrients get reused quickly.
Exactly. But the crucial point is that the nutrients aren't stored in the mineral soil itself. That soil is often very old, heavily leached by rainfall, and actually quite poor in nutrients. Instead, almost all the essential nutrients are locked up within the living biomass: the trees, the vines, the animals, and that thin layer of decomposing litter on the surface.
Right, so if you cut down the forest...
You're not just removing the trees, you're essentially removing the entire nutrient capital of the ecosystem in one go. The exposed soil might support crops for maybe a year or two, relying on the ash from burning the forest, but it quickly becomes depleted, nutritionally bankrupt.
That explains why cleared rainforest land often doesn't sustain agriculture for long.
Precisely. And it highlights the danger for species adapted to that environment. The source uses the example of the poison dart frog. These amphibians need that very specific, humid, complex forest floor environment. When the forest is cut down for farming or ranching, their habitat is just gone instantly. And because that soil is so poor, these forests do not regenerate quickly or easily. The damage can be effectively permanent on human timescales.
Okay, so we've moved through the major forest types. Now let's shift focus to ecosystems where moisture, or the lack of it, becomes the really dominant controlling factor. We're entering the grasslands. The source defines these by a specific rainfall range, right?
Yes, the key rainfall bracket is about 25 to 75 centimeters per year. That's roughly 10 to 30 inches. It's this intermediate zone, generally too dry to support a full closed canopy forest, but wetter than a true desert. So grasses become the dominant vegetation type.
And within that range, those variations in moisture make a big difference, leading to different types of grassland.
Absolutely. The subtle differences in exactly how much rain falls and when it falls during the year determine whether you get a sparse, low-productivity grassland or something much richer. This leads us to the two major types we need to differentiate: savanna and steppe.
Right. Let's get the details clear. Which is which, and what are the key numbers?
Okay, let's start with savanna, which are essentially tropical grasslands. You find these in what the text calls subhumid areas. It mentions examples like parts of Assam, Uttar Pradesh, even Jammu and Kashmir and India. Climate-wise, they get more rainfall than the other type, roughly 500 millimeters per year, which is 50 centimeters. But they also have a distinct and quite long dry season lasting about 6 to 8 months.
So 500 millimeters, about 20 inches. What does that mean for the plants and animals?
That level of rainfall, combined with the wet season, allows for pretty vigorous grass growth. Crucially, even though there's a long dry season, there's enough moisture overall that you get regrowth of forage even during the dry part. This means food is available for grazing animals more consistently through the year.
Ah, okay. Not just a short burst of green.
Right. And vegetation-wise, it's not just grass. Savannas typically feature grasses interspersed with scattered drought-resistant trees, like the Ch3 mentioned in the text, which provide some light shade. This mix supports those large herds of herbivores we often associate with African savannas, for example.
Okay, so savanna. Tropical, moderate rain, distinct wet dry seasons, trees scattered among grasses, year-round forage potential. Now contrast that with the steppe. These are temperate grasslands, right? And much drier.
Much, much drier and harsher. Steppe grasslands are characteristic of semi-arid regions. The text points to western Rajasthan and India as an example. Here, rainfall is really scanty, less than 200 millimeters per year, so less than 8 inches, and the dry season is incredibly long, dominating the year for 10 to 11 months.
Wow, that's extreme. What's the critical difference in terms of life there?
The absolute key differentiator is forage availability. Because the wet season is so brief and the rainfall so low, nutritious forage is available only during that short wet period. For the rest of the year, it's very sparse. The vegetation reflects this. You typically find sparse, short-lived annual grasses growing on sandy or sometimes saline soils. It's a much tougher place for grazers.
The steppe.
Yeah.
Temperate, very low rain, extremely long dry season, mostly treeless, forage only briefly available.
Got it. And these temperate grasslands have different names around the world, don't they? They do. While steppe is the term often associated with Central Asia and Eastern Europe, similar temperate grasslands are called prairie in North America and pampas in South America. Different names, but ecologically similar roles, vast, grassy plains shaped by moderate temperatures and limited rainfall.
And there's a human connection here, too, specifically for India's savannas. The source mentioned they aren't all purely natural.
Yes, that's a really important point for context. Many areas classified as savanna in India are thought to be derived from what were once more humid forests. Practices like shifting cultivation, slash and burn agriculture, and continuous sheep grazing over long periods gradually opened up the forest canopy, prevented tree regeneration, and favored the spread of grasses.
So human activity actually helped create some of these grassland ecosystems.
It appears so in many cases. It's a reminder that the line between natural and human-influenced ecosystems can be quite blurry, which has big implications for how we think about conserving them.
Definitely something to keep in mind. Okay, now let's push into the zone of ultimate water scarcity. The desert biome. The defining characteristic here is pretty straightforward, I assume.
Absolutely. The single defining feature of a desert is extremely low rainfall. We're talking consistently less than 25 centimeters or 10 inches per year, and often much, much less. Survival here is all about coping with dryness and often extreme temperatures.
Let's look at the plants first. They must have some incredible ways to survive with so little water. The text calls these xerophytic adaptations.
Yes, xero meaning dry, phytic meaning plant. These adaptations are all about minimizing water loss and maximizing water storage. What do you see? Things like hard, waxy coatings on leaves to reduce evaporation.
Right, like a sealant.
Exactly. Or plants reduce the surface area that loses water, developing tiny leaves, or even having no leaves at all for much of the year. And the most classic example, replacing leaves entirely with thorns, like you see in cacti and many other succulents found in places like the Thar Desert. Thorns not only reduce water loss, but also protect the plant's stored water from thirsty animals.
Clever. And the animals. They can't exactly grow thorns. How do they manage the heat and lack of water?
They employ a whole suite of amazing strategies, really falling into 3 categories: behavioral, physiological, and morphological.
Okay, break those down. Behavioral.
Behaviorally, it's often about avoidance. Many desert animals are incredibly fast runners, allowing them to cover large distances to find scarce resources or escape predators. But the most common behavioral trick is being nocturnal. They simply stay hidden in burrows or shade during the scorching heat of the day and come out to forage during the cooler night.
Makes sense. Avoid the worst of it. What about morphological body shape?
Morphologically, you often see adaptations related to temperature regulation. For instance, many desert animals and birds have noticeably long legs. This helps keep their main body mass further away from the searingly hot ground surface, allowing for better air circulation and heat dissipation. Think of desert foxes with large ears too, another way to radiate heat.
Right, built-in radiators. And physiologically, inside their bodies, how do they handle the lack of water to drink?
Physiologically, it's all about water conservation. The kidneys of many desert animals are incredibly efficient. They are able to excrete highly concentrated urine, reabsorbing almost every possible drop of water back into the body. Some small mammals can get most or all the water they need directly from their food, the metabolic water produced when they break down seeds or insects.
So they barely need to drink at all.
Some hardly ever need to drink freestanding water. The source gives an anecdote about desert lizards. Many are insectivorous and can apparently live for several days without drinking, just getting moisture from the insects they eat. Every drop counts in the desert.
Okay, that tour through the world's major biomes, all dictated by those gradients of moisture and temperature, sets us up perfectly for this next section. Section 4, the Indian forest landscape. Because India's geography is so diverse, stretching from near equatorial climates up to the high Himalayas, it contains an incredible variety of forest types. The source lists, 15 distinct types? This is where we really need to nail the specifics for exam purposes.
Absolutely. India is like a microcosm of the world's biomes in many ways. This detailed classification, which you really need to know, is driven by those same factors we've been discussing: climate, rainfall, and temperature patterns, but also soil type, the shape of the land, topography, and of course, elevation. We should go through the major ones listed.
Let's start at the wettest end of the spectrum, the tropical forest subtypes in India. First up, tropical wet evergreen forest. Where do we find these and what are they like?
Right, these are the archetypal rainforests of India. You find them in the regions that get the heaviest rainfall, primarily the windward side of the Western Ghats, and extensively across northeast India. They are exactly what you'd picture: incredibly dense forests with very tall trees forming multiple layers. High species diversity is a key characteristic.
And like the global tropical rainforests, do they show that distinct layering, the stratification?
Yes, the source confirms that distinct stratification into 3 horizontal layers is present here too. Flora-wise, economically important trees like ebony are prominent, but it's a sheer variety that's stunning: loads of mosses, ferns, epiphytes like orchids clinging to trees, thick lianas and vines, plus a dense undergrowth of herbs and shrubs. It's lush, complex, and very humid.
Okay, wettest of the wet. Now what about areas that are still tropical and rainy but maybe experience a slight dry spell? That brings us to tropical semi-evergreen forest.
Exactly. These are kind of a transition zone, often found bordering the true wet evergreen forests in areas with slightly less rainfall or a short dry season. Think parts of the Western Ghats again, coastal Odisha, the Andaman Islands.
So a mix of tree types?
Precisely. It's a mixture of evergreen species and moisture-loving deciduous species trees that do shed their leaves, but maybe not all at once or for very long. They tend to be less dense than the fully evergreen forests, but are still rich and commercially quite important, containing species like white cedar, hawlock, and kale.
Got it. Now, probably the most widespread forest type across India, judging by the maps, the tropical moist deciduous forest.
Yes, these cover a huge chunk of the country, found all along the foothills of the Himalayas, the Shivaliks, down through central India like Madhya Pradesh, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, parts of Odisha, and into the eastern Ghats. They thrive in areas receiving a good amount of rain, typically 100 to 200 centimeters annually.
And deciduous means they lose their leaves.
Yes, that's the key adaptation here. The trees shed their leaves for about 6 to 8 weeks, usually during the dry season before the summer monsoon, to conserve water. This is the forest type where teak, saguan, is the dominant and most commercially valuable species. You also find other important hardwoods like sal, sandalwood, chandam, and shisham. Because of these valuable timbers, these forests face enormous pressure from logging.
A crucial type, both ecologically and economically. We should also mention the forests adapted to very specific waterlogged conditions, littoral and swamp forests.
Ah, yes, the coastal and wetland forests. These are found along coastlines, in river deltas, estuaries, and tidal marshes where the soil is waterlogged and often saline. The most famous example, of course, is the mangrove forest.
Like the Sundarbans.
Exactly. The Sundarbans Delta is the world's largest mangrove area, but you also find them along other coasts, like in Gujarat, Mahanadi Delta, Krishna Godavari Delta, and the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. These forests, with trees adapted to salty, oxygen-poor water, like Sundari trees, Rhizophora, are incredibly important. They act as natural barriers, protecting the coast from storms and erosion, and they're critical nursery grounds for fish and other marine life.
Vital ecosystems. Okay, let's move back inland, but to areas where rainfall starts to decrease significantly. This leads us to the tropical dry deciduous forest.
Right. These are also very widespread, often found adjacent to the moist deciduous type, but in areas receiving less rainfall, generally between 70 and 100 centimeters per year. They cover large parts of the northern plains, except the very wet NE, Madhya Pradesh, Gujarat, Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, and Tamil Nadu.
How do they look different from the moist deciduous?
They tend to be more open. The canopy isn't usually as dense or as tall. The source says it doesn't normally exceed 25 meters. The trees here also shed their leaves during the dry season, which is generally longer than in the moist deciduous zone. Key flora includes sal, though perhaps less dominant than in moist forests, various species of acacia, like care, and bamboo is often very common, especially if the forest has been disturbed.
Okay, getting drier. What happens when rainfall drops even further, below that 70, 100 centimeter range?
Then you transition into scrubbier vegetation. We enter the tropical thorn forest.
Thorn forest sounds prickly. Where are these found?
These are characteristic of semi-arid regions with rainfall typically less than 50 centimeters. The source specifically mentions they often occur in areas with black soil, which is interesting. Across parts of North, West, Central, and South India, think drier parts of Punjab, Haryana, Rajasthan, Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, and the Deccan Plateau.
And the vegetation?
As the name suggests, it's dominated by thorny, small-leaved, or succulent plants adapted to extreme drought. Trees are generally stunted. The text says they don't usually grow beyond 10 meters. You find species like spurge, euphorbia, caper, various acacias again, and cacti. It's a tough, scrubby landscape.
Right, that covers the main tropical types based on moisture. Now we need to bring altitude back into the picture, moving into the subtropical and montane zones, starting with a potentially confusing one. Tropical dry evergreen forest. Why tropical and dry and evergreen?
Yeah, the name seems contradictory, doesn't it? This is a subtropical type, despite the name. Its climate is quite unique. It experiences a prolonged hot and dry season, but also a distinct cool winter. It's found mainly along the southeastern coast, Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, and also, interestingly, in the Shivalik Hills and Himalayan foothills up to about 1,000 meters.
Okay, so what makes it evergreen if it's dry?
The trees are evergreen, but they have special adaptations for the dryness. The key feature mentioned is that their leaves are tough, leathery, and often have a shining, varnished appearance. This helps reduce water loss through transpiration during that long, hot, and dry period. So they stay green, but they're built for drought. Common species include jamun, Retha, tamarind.
Fascinating adaptation.
Okay.
Let's climb higher into the hills now. What about the subtropical broad-leaved hill forest and the subtropical pine forest?
Right. Moving up in altitude, generally between 1,000 and 2,000 meters, especially in the Himalayas and also in the hills of South India like the Nilgiris. The subtropical broad-leaved hill forest is found in the moister areas within this altitude band, particularly in the eastern Himalayas. These are quite dense forests dominated by evergreen species like oaks, chestnuts, ash, and laurels.
And the pine forests?
The subtropical pine forest tends to occur in slightly drier areas within the same altitude range or where fire might be a factor. They are most characteristic of the western and central Himalayas, like in Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand. As the name implies, they are heavily dominated by a single species, cheer pine. These forests are more open than the broad-leaved type.
Okay, climbing higher still. Now we enter the temperate zone within the mountains. The Montane wet temperate forest. The source splits this by region, north and south. Let's start with the north.
Yes, in the north, specifically in the eastern Himalayas, east of Nepal across to Arunachal Pradesh, between about 1,800 and 3,000 meters, you find these montane wet temperate forests. They receive very high rainfall. The source has a minimum of 2,000 millimeters, 200 centimeters. These are dense, lush forests, often described as having 3 layers.
3 layers again, like the tropical ones.
Sort of, but with different species. The higher layer tends to be coniferous. The middle layer is often deciduous broadleaf trees, particularly oaks, and the lowest layer is typically a dense growth of rhododendron and champa, along with ferns and mosses covering everything. Very moist, often misty.
How does the southern version compare?
In the south, these are found on the higher reaches of the Nilgiri Hills, the Annamalai Hills, and Palani Hills in Tamil Nadu and Kerala areas, often called sholas. They occur at similar altitudes, above 1,500 meters or so. While structurally similar with rhododendrons and ground flora, the source notes they are generally less dense than their northern counterparts. They appear as patches of forest nestled within rolling grasslands.
Interesting difference. Okay, we also need to cover the other Himalayan temperate forests, differentiated by moisture. Himalayan moist temperate and Himalayan dry temperate.
Right. The Himalayan moist temperate forest is found across the Himalayas, generally between 1,500 and 3,300 meters, in regions receiving significant rainfall and winter snow. This is the classic temperate forest of the Himalayas, dominated by coniferous trees like deodar, cedar, blue pine, kale, spruce, and silver fir, often mixed with broadleaf trees like oaks, maples, and walnuts at low elevations.
So, quite dense and commercially important for timber.
Very much so. Now contrast that with the Himalayan dry temperate forest. These occur in the inner, drier ranges of the Himalayas, areas that lie in a rain shadow. Think Ladakh, Lahul Spiti, parts of Kinnaur and Himachal Pradesh. Rainfall is much lower here.
So the vegetation must be quite different.
Yes, it's much more open, almost sparse in places. You find conifers adapted to drier conditions like Chilgoza pine, which produces edible nuts, and also juniper. Broadleaf trees are much less common, maybe some ash or maple. The undergrowth is often just dry grasses and shrubs.
Okay, nearly at the top. Just below the permanent snow line, we have the highest altitude vegetation zones, subalpine forest and alpine scrub.
Exactly. The subalpine forest forms the transition zone, typically found between roughly 2,900 and 3,500 meters, marking the upper limit of tree growth, the timberline. Here again, there's a difference between West and East Himalayas.
What's it different?
In the Western Himalayas, this zone often features conifers like fir and kale, mixed with deciduous trees like birch, butchpatra, and shrubs like rhododendron, willow, and blackcurrant. In the wetter Eastern Himalayas, the mix might include red fir, black juniper, birch, and larch.
And the source mentions something about the timberline being higher in the east.
Yes, that's a key point. The timberline is generally higher in the Eastern Himalayas than in the West. This is attributed to the higher rainfall and greater humidity in the east, which allows trees to survive at slightly higher elevations compared to the drier western ranges.
Makes sense. And then finally, above the trees.
Above the subalpine forest, trees give way entirely to the alpine scrub zone. This is further divided based on moisture. The moist alpine scrub found in wetter areas consists of low-growing, dense thickets of rhododendron, birch, berberis, and honeysuckle. The dry alpine scrub found in the arid high-altitude regions, like Ladakh again, is much sparser, characterized by xerophytic, drought-adapted dwarf shrubs, grasses, and cushion plants surviving on rocky terrain. This marks the absolute upper limit of vegetation before you hit permanent snow and ice.
Wow. That's an incredible journey, from the wettest tropical forests right up to the limits of life in the high Himalayas. Covering those 15 types really underscores India's amazing ecological diversity. It truly is a world within a country.
Okay, we've systematically built up this detailed inventory of global biomes and Indian forest types. We've seen how tightly everything is controlled by moisture and temperature. Now, let's step back from the list and focus on what this all means strategically. What are the big takeaways for understanding conservation, policy, and maybe even answering exam questions? Right, let's distill this. First, maybe a quick conceptual Q&A to lock in a key distinction we made earlier.
Good idea. Let me pose one based on the grasslands. We talked about savanna and steppe. What's the primary quantitative climatic difference, based on the numbers in our source, that really separates a low-forage steppe from a more productive savanna grazing ecosystem?
Okay, good question, focusing on the numbers. The critical difference lies in the precipitation amount and the length of the dry season. For the steppe, temperate grasslands, the key figures are very low rainfall, specifically less than 200 millimeters per year, combined with an extremely long dry season of 10 to 11 months. This means forage is available only during that very brief wet period.
Okay, 200 millimeter rain, 10, 11-month dry season. And the savanna?
For the savanna, tropical grasslands, specifically the dry type mentioned in the Indian context, the rainfall is significantly higher, around 500 millimeters per year. The dry season is still long, about 6 to 8 months, but that higher overall rainfall and shorter dry period allows for regrowth of forage even in the dry season, making it much more productive for grazers year-round. So it's really about crossing those rainfall thresholds and the duration of dryness.
Excellent. Numbers locked in. Now let's do some rapid-fire prelims. Pointers matching key terms or species to their biomes or locations, straight from the text. Quick recall practice.
You did me.
Tundra biome, key fauna and defining feature.
Reindeer, Arctic fox, and definitely permafrost.
Taiga, dominant trees.
Spruce, fir, pine, the classic evergreens, conifers.
Temperate rainforest, unique water source.
Heavy fog, often more important than rain itself.
Tropical wet evergreen forest in India. Key location and a characteristic tree.
Western Ghats and ebony trees.
Tropical thorn forest. Where found? Characteristic soil, typical plants.
Found often in black soil areas. Plants like spurge, caper, cactus.
Desert biome adaptation give you one behavioral, one physiological, one morphological.
Okay, behavioral, nocturnal habit, physiological, excreting concentrated urine, morphological, long legs to keep the body off the hot ground.
Perfect. Quick hits for memory. Now let's broaden out to the main's insights. Thinking about the bigger picture, vulnerability, climate change, human impact.
This is crucial. The details we covered really highlight why some of these ecosystems are so incredibly fragile. Take the tundra, for example. Those slow growth rates, the long life cycles of plants like the Arctic willow, recovery from any disturbance takes centuries. And now, with climate change, the thawing of permafrost is a massive threat. It destabilizes the ground, impacts infrastructure, and releases huge amounts of stored greenhouse gases like methane.
A ticking time bomb, almost. And the tropical rainforests. We talked about their nutrient cycle vulnerability.
Exactly. Despite their lush appearance and high diversity, that reliance on nutrients being held in the biomass, not the soil, makes them acutely vulnerable to deforestation. Once cleared, recovery is incredibly slow, if it happens at all.
And in the Indian context, deforestation isn't just about losing species, is it? It has wider climatic impacts.
Profound impacts. Forests play a vital role in the regional water cycle through transpiration, drawing water up and releasing it back into the atmosphere as moisture, which then contributes to rainfall downwind.
So cutting forests breaks that cycle.
It fundamentally disrupts it. Large-scale deforestation leads to an immediate lowering of local groundwater levels because there's less infiltration and trees aren't holding the water. And over the longer term, it can lead to a significant reduction in regional precipitation. You lose that recycling effect. At the same time, without forest cover to slow down water flow, you get increased rapid surface runoff, leading to soil erosion and potentially more intense localized flooding during heavy rain events.
It messes with the whole hydrological system. The source also mentioned a specific, maybe less obvious link between deforestation and industry, something about mining.
Yes, that was a very specific detail, but highlights the interconnectedness. Even underground mining operations contribute to deforestation. Why? Because timber is extensively used underground for supporting the roofs of mine galleries and tunnels.
Pit props.
Exactly. So even if the mining itself is subsurface, the demand for structural timber, often sourced from nearby forests, creates another pressure point, linking resource extraction directly to forest loss. It's not just about clearing land for open pit mines.
That's a really important connection to understand. This whole deep dive has really emphasized how interconnected everything is: climate, vegetation, soil, water, animals, and human activities. Every element is part of a complex balance.
It truly is.
Yeah.
Which brings us to a final thought, something for you, the listener, to really chew on. We highlighted earlier that many Indian savannas are believed to have anthropogenic origins. They likely expanded or were even created from former human forests due to long-term human practices like shifting cultivation and intensive grazing.
Right, the idea that they aren't purely natural climatic grasslands in some areas.
So the question to ponder is this. If we understand that a significant ecosystem, currently perhaps classified and managed as a natural grassland or savanna, actually owes its existence or extent to past human actions, how should that knowledge influence our conservation strategies today? Do we try to preserve it in its current human-modified state? Do we see it as degraded forest land that should be restored? Does recognizing its anthropogenic origin change how we value it or how we approach its management in the face of modern pressures like climate change?
That's a complex question. It challenges the simple natural versus human-impacted dichotomy.
It does. It forces us to think critically about baselines, about historical ecology, and about what conservation truly means for landscapes that have been shaped by people for centuries. Something to keep thinking about long after this deep dive ends.
Thanks for watching. Follow us on Telegram and Instagram. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.